The red wax seal was still visible on the architectural blueprints when Maya Devereux saw them lifted onto the presentation platform. Her name was not. Standing in a red blazer near the edge of the crowd, she watched Alastair Sterling step forward in a charcoal black suit, while Serena Vance, dressed in ivory, accepted the attention meant for someone else. The tower behind them rose hundreds of feet into the skyline, a monument built from calculations, patents, and structural systems Maya had spent years perfecting. Then Alastair smiled for the cameras and made his announcement. Serena, he declared, was the creative force behind the city's newest architectural landmark. A few seconds later came the sentence Maya would remember long after the applause ended. Maya was never the artist. She was only the technician. The audience heard confidence. Maya heard intent. This was not a man claiming credit. This was a man rewriting history. She looked at the blueprint. She looked at the red seal. Then she understood. Alastair believed ownership could erase creation. He had miscalculated. Maya did not wait for the rest of the presentation. She stepped away from the crowd before the questions began and crossed a private corridor leading toward the executive elevator reserved for project leadership. The doors closed behind her. The noise of the event disappeared. For the first time all evening, she was alone. Maya set the blueprint tube across her arm and opened the secure portfolio attached beneath it. Inside were the documents that mattered. Not speeches, not branding, not headlines. The structural certification package remained active under her name. The engineering patents remained registered to her intellectual property company. The proprietary load distribution system that allowed the tower to meet safety standards still belonged to her. She reviewed each page with the calm precision of an engineer checking measurements down to the inch. The facts had not changed simply because Alastair wanted a different story. The foundation remained. She reached the certification index and stopped. A signature block appeared beside a compliance authorization required for final operational approval. Her signature. Nobody else's. Maya read the page twice. Then she closed the folder. Preserve that. The elevator reached the underground parking level. She walked toward her car without slowing her pace and opened a secure communication portal on her tablet. Her message to the licensing officer contained only a few sentences. She requested immediate preservation of all certification records associated with her structural patents and engineering approvals connected to the Sterling project. No accusations, no threats, no emotion, just documentation. Then she sent it. Verify every filing. By the time she entered the driver's seat, a confirmation notice had already appeared on the screen. The review process was now active. Maya leaned back and stared through the windshield. For years, she had believed the tower represented a shared legacy. Tonight, she saw it differently. The structure rising above the city belonged to steel, mathematics, and accountability. None of those things cared about ego. None of those things cared about public relations. Gravity never negotiated with arrogance. She secured the blueprint tube, started the engine, and drove away from the project she had built. Behind her, the celebration continued. Ahead of her, something far more important had begun. The file stayed read. The drive back to Maya Devereux's private archive studio took less than 30 minutes, but by the time she arrived, the distance between her and Sterling Group felt much larger. The building occupied a quiet industrial block far from investor presentations and luxury marketing campaigns. Inside, there were no photographers, no speeches, and no people competing to be seen. There were only drawings, models, calculations, and records. The things that remained valuable after applause disappeared. Maya placed the blueprint tube on a drafting table and unlocked a secured storage cabinet built specifically for original project archives. Hundreds of documents rested inside. Years of work, years of precision, years of trust. She removed a flat portfolio marked with a date from the earliest phase of the tower project and carried it beneath a task light. Then she opened it. Most of the drawings remained exactly as she remembered them. One did not. Maya froze for a moment as she stared at the damaged sheet. It was one of her earliest hand sketches for the tower's crown structure, drawn long before investors arrived and long before the project became a public symbol. She recognized every line immediately. She also recognized the cuts. Large portions of the drawing had been removed with careful precision. The missing sections left empty spaces across the page. At first, the damage seemed meaningless. Then she remembered the promotional photographs released weeks earlier featuring Serena Vance inside a luxury penthouse showroom. Decorative architectural fragments had appeared behind her in several images. Maya reached for her tablet and opened the campaign materials. The answer arrived quickly. Pieces of her original drawing had been mounted behind Serena as visual decoration for a fashion-inspired architectural spread. Maya looked at the screen. Then she looked back at the drawing. The room remained silent. So did she. The injury was not financial. It was not professional. It was something deeper. That sketch had never been intended for public display. She had drawn it during the final months of her mother's illness, sitting beside hospital windows while refining structural concepts that would eventually become the tower. Every line carried memory. Every correction carried patience. Alistair knew that. He had watched her create it. Suddenly Maya understood what hurt most. He had not simply taken credit for her work. He had taken meaning from it and turned it into decoration. Then Maya understood. The betrayal was not the tower. The betrayal was the assumption that her memories belonged to him as well. She carefully lifted the damaged drawing and placed it inside a preservation sleeve. Preserve that. The page could not be restored, but it could be protected. Maya spent the next hour reviewing archive records connected to Sterling Group. Original calculations, patent references, certification correspondence, proprietary structural sequences. The more she reviewed, the clearer the reality became. Alistair controlled buildings. He did not control the knowledge that made them possible. Serena controlled attention. She did not control expertise. The things they celebrated on stage existed because Maya had created them. The realization changed something inside her. Not dramatically, not all at once. Like a foundation settling beneath a structure, it shifted quietly and permanently. She opened a new project directory on her secure server and began transferring every independent patent, calculation model, and engineering framework that belonged solely to her portfolio. One file at a time. No more permission. Near midnight, the transfer process continued running across multiple screens. Maya stood beside the drafting table and looked once more at the damaged sketch. The pain remained, but it no longer felt directionless. It had become a decision. Sterling Group could keep the story it wanted to tell. Maya intended to keep the truth. The foundation remained. By sunrise, Maya Devereux had stopped thinking like a betrayed wife and returned to thinking like a structural engineer. Emotion could explain what had happened. Engineering could determine what happened next. The difference mattered. Her archive studio remained quiet as digital models rotated across multiple monitors. Every screen displayed a different layer of the Sterling Tower project. Foundation loads, wind resistance systems, core stability calculations, emergency stress tolerances. Maya reviewed them one by one, not because she doubted her work, but because precision had always been her form of discipline. Years earlier, she had developed a proprietary load distribution sequence capable of reducing structural stress across the upper sections of super-tall residential towers. The system became one of the reasons investors had trusted the project in the first place. It was also protected under patents registered exclusively to her engineering portfolio. Maya opened the patent records and compared them against the certification package currently attached to the tower. Every critical sequence pointed back to the same source. Her. She moved to the next file, then the next. Verify every filing. Hours passed. The deeper she went, the more obvious the truth became. The building standing over the city was not simply an architectural statement. It was a legal chain of technical accountability. Structural certifications depended on specific engineering methodologies. Those methodologies depended on patented calculations. Those calculations belonged to Maya. If one link disappeared, the entire approval structure could collapse under review. Not physically, professionally, legally, financially. She documented everything. Then she contacted the licensing officer and requested confirmation that every certification reference remained preserved exactly as originally filed. The response arrived before noon. The records remained intact. Nothing had been altered. Maya read the message twice. That was enough. Across the city, Alistair Sterling continued presenting himself as the visionary behind the project. News coverage highlighted luxury residences, exclusive amenities, and projected market value. Interview clips circulated online. Maya watched several of them without sound before enabling the audio. The pattern appeared almost immediately. Whenever reporters asked about the tower's cultural significance, Alastair spoke confidently. Whenever discussion shifted toward engineering, he redirected attention toward design aesthetics, investor confidence, or Serena's artistic influence. He never discussed structural systems. He never discussed safety methodology. He never discussed how the building actually worked. Maya noticed something else. During one interview, a lead journalist asked a straightforward question regarding the tower's unique stability profile under high wind conditions. Alastair smiled. Then he pivoted toward branding. Serena stepped in and spoke about inspiration, elegance, and public experience. The technical question disappeared unanswered. Maya leaned back in her chair. Then Maya understood. Alastair's greatest fear had never been failure. Failure could be managed, rebranded, hidden. His real fear was exposure. He feared standing in a room where expertise mattered more than influence. He feared being compared to the person who actually understood the structure carrying his name. Most of all, he feared a simple realization spreading through investors, journalists, and lenders alike. Without Maya, he could not explain the tower he claimed as his legacy. He had built an empire around appearing indispensable. The truth threatened something far more valuable than money. It threatened identity. Maya closed the interview window and returned to her records. One certification package remained highlighted on her screen. The operational approval process was still moving forward. For now, she saved a final archive copy and secured it behind encrypted storage. Preserve the record. Outside, the tower still dominated the skyline. Inside the documentation, a very different structure was beginning to shift. The foundation remained. Buildings are made of steel and stone, but a legacy is built on the names that the blueprints try to forget. Most people think betrayal arrives as a dramatic moment, a single sentence, or a public humiliation. In reality, the most dangerous betrayals begin much earlier. They begin when someone slowly convinces themselves that another person's contribution can be separated from the person who created it. The process usually sounds reasonable. It hides behind contracts, presentations, titles, and carefully selected language. Eventually, the theft becomes so complete that the thief forgets it was ever theft at all. That was the illusion Alastair Sterling had chosen. He believed a name could replace expertise. He believed visibility could replace substance. Most of all, he believed the world would accept a prettier story if he repeated it often enough. But structures do not operate on stories. They operate on truth. A tower does not remain standing because investors applaud. It remains standing because calculations remain correct. Maya Devereux understood that difference better than anyone. The injury she carried was still real. The damaged sketch remained locked inside preservation storage. The memories attached to it had not disappeared. Yet something had changed. The pain was no longer leading her decisions. Accuracy was. So she moved. 3 weeks after leaving Sterling Group, Maya transformed an abandoned industrial design space into a temporary engineering studio. It was not glamorous. It did not need to be. Long drafting tables filled the center of the room. Scale models occupied reinforced shelving along the walls. Structural diagrams covered display panels stretching nearly 20 feet across one side of the workspace. Patent records occupied an entire secured archive section protected by biometric access. Every object inside the studio served a purpose. Every object represented creation. Maya arrived before sunrise most mornings and often remained long after sunset. New projects began appearing across her drafting tables. Independent residential concepts. Advanced structural frameworks, research partnerships, engineering innovations she had postponed for years while helping build Sterling Group. One model in particular drew her attention. A glass tower prototype supported by a newly developed stabilization system designed entirely under her own name. No corporate ownership, no shared branding, no compromises. Maya spent hours refining its load distribution network and documenting performance metrics down to fractions of an inch. Build it right. At the same time, inquiries quietly started arriving. A developer requested a consultation regarding structural risk analysis. A design director asked about licensing opportunities connected to Maya's patent portfolio. An investor relations officer reached out seeking technical guidance on an unrelated project. None of them mentioned Alastair directly. They did not need to. Reputation travels faster than announcements inside professional circles. Maya answered only the opportunities that aligned with her standards. The rest she declined. Select carefully. One afternoon, she paused beside a scale model and studied its foundation system. The moment felt strangely familiar. Years earlier, she had built another future from an empty table. The difference now was ownership. Every drawing belonged to her. Every patent belonged to her. Every decision belonged to her. Across the city, Alastair continued chasing visibility. Inside the studio, Maya focused on permanence. One strategy depended on attention. The other depended on value. Time would decide which. Foundation proved stronger. The file stayed red. 6 weeks after the public unveiling, Alastair Sterling looked exactly like a man who had won. The tower dominated headlines. Luxury publications described it as the city's most anticipated residential landmark. Financial analysts praised projected revenue figures. Exclusive tours attracted investors willing to spend millions for future ownership opportunities. Standing beneath towering glass panels inside a private presentation space near the completed structure, Alastair moved comfortably between reporters, developers, and lenders. His black suit fit perfectly. His confidence appeared untouched. Beside him, Serena Vance occupied the role he had created for her. Dressed in an ivory designer ensemble, she guided visitors through curated exhibits celebrating the creative vision behind the tower. Large displays featured artistic concepts, lifestyle imagery, and architectural renderings. Serena spoke fluently about culture, luxury, and influence. The audience responded exactly as Alastair hoped. Cameras followed her. Social media amplified her presence. Investors smiled. From a distance, the strategy seemed brilliant. Serena had become the face. Alastair remained the owner. Maya's name rarely appeared in public coverage anymore. At least that was the illusion. Across multiple interviews that afternoon, one pattern quietly repeated itself. Whenever discussions focused on exclusivity, Alastair thrived. Whenever conversations centered on branding, he grew more confident. Whenever journalists praised market demand, he responded immediately. Then came a different kind of question. A lead journalist referenced the tower's unusual stability system and asked what engineering breakthrough had made the design possible. For a brief moment, Alastair's expression changed. Almost imperceptibly, almost invisible. Then he redirected the conversation toward innovation culture and luxury living experiences. The answer never arrived. Serena stepped forward and began discussing artistic inspiration instead. The audience accepted the transition and moved on. Most people did not notice what had happened. A few professionals did. The lead journalists certainly did. Alastair noticed as well. That was why he became increasingly careful whenever technical subjects appeared. He could manage public perception. He could not manage expertise. Later that evening, another interview created a similar moment. This time the discussion involved wind resistance performance and structural flexibility. Serena attempted an answer built around aesthetics. The question remained unanswered. Alastair immediately shifted attention toward market success projections. Once again, the conversation escaped him. For now, he had miscalculated. Inside the executive reception area, investors congratulated him on the project's momentum. Lenders expressed confidence. Several development partners discussed future opportunities. The atmosphere remained optimistic. Yet beneath the surface, a different reality was beginning to emerge. The people who truly understood architecture rarely asked about branding. They asked about systems. They asked about methodology. They asked about responsibility. Every technical question pointed toward a person no longer standing in the room. Maya Devereux. Alastair understood this better than anyone. That was why her absence bothered him more than he admitted. Not because he missed her, because he could not replace her. Later, after most guests had departed, he stood alone beside a floor-to-ceiling model of the tower. The building reflected perfectly beneath controlled lighting. It looked complete. It looked powerful. It looked permanent. Yet Alastair found himself staring at the foundation diagram displayed beneath the model longer than necessary. The technical language meant little to him. It never had. For years he had depended on Maya to translate complexity into certainty. Now the certainty was gone. He still owned the tower. He still controlled the project. Yet a question had begun following him from interview to interview, room to room, conversation to conversation. Who actually built it? He pushed the thought aside and returned to the celebration. But the question remained. The foundation remembered. The first sign of trouble did not arrive as a public scandal. It arrived as paperwork. 3 days after the investor showcase, a routine compliance review generated a request for additional verification regarding the tower's structural certification chain. The inquiry appeared ordinary on the surface. Large projects received regulatory questions all the time. Most were resolved quickly. Sterling Group treated the notice as a minor administrative inconvenience. Alastair barely looked at it before forwarding the matter to internal staff. He expected confirmation and closure. Instead, more requests followed. Licensing records required clarification regarding proprietary engineering methodologies referenced throughout the tower's approval package. Patent ownership records were reviewed against certification documentation. Operational approval timelines were temporarily paused pending verification. Nothing dramatic happened. That was precisely the problem. Systems rarely announce their danger. They simply continue asking questions until the answers stop matching. Read it again. Across the city, Maya Devereux continued working inside her studio. She received periodic updates through official channels, but made no public statements. Her role was no longer emotional. It was procedural. Every certification package contained references. Every reference led somewhere. Every path eventually led back to the same engineering portfolio. Hers. Maya reviewed the notices carefully. The language remained neutral. The process remained professional. Nobody accused Sterling Group of wrongdoing. Nobody needed to. Facts create pressure without raising their voices. Meanwhile, lenders financing portions of the project began requesting independent verification reports. Investors sought reassurance that operational approvals would proceed according to schedule. Development partners asked whether certification reviews could affect future occupancy dates. Questions multiplied. Answers became slower. Inside executive meetings, Alastair insisted everything remained under control. Technically, he was correct. The tower still stood. Construction was complete. Sales contracts remained active. Public confidence remained largely intact. Yet the confidence felt different now. It required maintenance. It required explanations. It required certainty. The one thing Alastair could not personally provide. Verify every filing. During a conference call with several lenders, a representative requested clarification regarding the engineering patents supporting the tower's structural approval framework. Alastair redirected the discussion toward project value and long-term market performance. The response satisfied nobody. Professional silence followed. Then another request arrived. Documentation was needed. Not branding. Not projections. Documentation. Similar conversations began appearing elsewhere. A development partner requested technical verification. A compliance officer asked for certification cross-references. A lender delayed final authorization pending review. None of these actions destroyed the project. Together, however, they began slowing it. The system was turning. The process continued over several weeks. Every review uncovered another layer of dependency linking the tower's approvals to engineering systems owned by Maya. The reality became impossible to ignore. Sterling Group possessed the building. Maya possessed the foundation beneath its legal legitimacy. One afternoon, Alastair stood inside a boardroom overlooking the tower while reviewing another compliance update. The report contained no accusations, no threats, no dramatic language. It simply identified unresolved certification dependencies requiring confirmation before final operational authorization could proceed. The wording was calm. The implications were not. For the first time, Alastair stopped treating the situation as a public relations challenge. This was something else entirely. Public perception could be managed. Regulatory processes could not be charmed. Investors could be reassured. Structural accountability demanded evidence. He stared through the glass toward the tower dominating the skyline and felt an unfamiliar sensation beginning to take shape beneath his confidence. Doubt, not about the building itself, about the story he had built around it. Maya remained silent. The records did not. The foundation remained. The official inauguration of the Sterling Tower was supposed to be the moment everything became permanent. Investors arrived expecting certainty. Journalists arrived expecting celebration. Buyers arrived expecting validation for decisions worth millions of dollars. The structure itself stood flawless against the skyline, its glass exterior reflecting sunlight exactly as the marketing campaigns had promised. On the surface, Nothing appeared wrong. Beneath the surface, everything was shifting. Alistair Sterling entered the event in a tailored black suit and moved through the crowd with practiced confidence. Serena Vance followed in ivory, surrounded by cameras and media attention. The schedule had been carefully organized. Presentations, interviews, recognition, visibility, control. Then the questions began. At first they sounded harmless. A lead journalist asked Serena about the engineering philosophy behind the tower's unique stabilization framework. Serena smiled and began discussing inspiration, elegance, and artistic influence. The question remained unanswered. Another journalist asked how the structure achieved its unusual load distribution efficiency while maintaining luxury design standards. Serena paused. Then she redirected toward aesthetics once again. Several professionals exchanged glances. The atmosphere changed almost imperceptibly. A few minutes later, a licensing officer arrived carrying updated compliance documentation. The timing could not have been worse. Operational authorization remained suspended pending final verification of certification dependencies linked to proprietary engineering systems. The announcement was delivered calmly. No drama, no accusations, just procedure. Yet procedure was enough. Conversations stopped. Investors read the documents. Journalists reviewed notes. The same question began moving quietly through the crowd. Who actually designed this tower? Read it carefully. Alistair stepped forward and attempted to regain control. He spoke about vision. He spoke about leadership. He spoke about investment and development. Nobody interrupted him. That made it worse. The audience was no longer listening for confidence. They were listening for proof. A senior representative from a lending group requested clarification regarding the engineering certifications. Alistair could not provide it. A compliance officer asked about patent ownership connections referenced throughout the approval package. Alistair redirected the discussion. Again, the silence that followed felt heavier than any argument. Then the system finished what it had started weeks earlier. Formal notice arrived confirming that operational approval could not proceed until unresolved certification and ownership issues were fully addressed. The tower remained standing. The launch did not. Around him, relationships began changing shape. Quietly, the investor who had spent months praising the project suddenly focused on reviewing documents instead of conversation. The private banker answered questions with measured neutrality rather than enthusiasm. The executive assistant no longer rushed forward anticipating Alistair's needs. Several development partners moved toward other discussions. Even Serena's attention shifted. For the first time, she looked less concerned about headlines and more concerned about consequences. Alistair noticed everything. That was the moment the crack appeared. Not in the tower. In him. For years he had convinced himself that visibility created value. That ownership created importance. That a powerful narrative could replace uncomfortable truths. Now he stood surrounded by people who wanted evidence instead of image. The realization struck harder than any financial setback. They were beginning to see what he feared most. Without Maya Devereux, he could not explain the foundation beneath his own legacy. The applause was gone. Nobody announced its disappearance. Nobody needed to. Alistair looked across the crowd and saw something money had always protected him from. Doubt. Not Maya's. Everyone else's. His authority had depended on being believed. That belief was leaving the room. One silent conversation at a time. The foundation remembered. 3 days after the failed inauguration, Alistair Sterling arrived at Maya Devereux's studio without cameras, investors, or public statements. For the first time in years, he came alone. The difference was immediately visible. Not because his clothes had changed. Not because his title had disappeared. Because certainty no longer walked beside him. The receptionist area of the studio contained architectural models, patent displays, and structural prototypes illuminated beneath clean white lighting. Everything in the room carried Maya's name. Everything in the room existed because she had built it. Alistair noticed that immediately. He waited nearly 15 minutes before Maya entered from a design review session deeper inside the building. She wore a red blazer and carried a slim portfolio beneath one arm. Her expression remained calm, professional, controlled. She did not offer sympathy. She did not offer anger. She simply took a seat across from him at a conference table overlooking a series of scale tower models. For several seconds neither spoke. Then Alistair finally broke the silence. He began where many powerful men begin when control starts slipping away. He called the situation unfortunate. He described the certification issues as misunderstandings. He spoke about investors, lenders, delays, and market consequences. He never used the word responsibility. Maya listened without interruption. When he finished, she folded her hands across the table. The room became quiet again. Say it clearly. Alistair looked away for a moment before continuing. This time the request emerged. He wanted cooperation. He wanted access to the engineering certifications. He wanted assistance resolving the operational suspension. He wanted her involvement in restoring confidence around the project. He presented the request as practical rather than personal, business rather than history. Maya opened the portfolio she had carried into the room and removed a set of architectural blueprints secured beneath a red wax seal. The same seal that had appeared on the documents displayed during the unveiling where he attempted to erase her. She placed the package between them. Neither touched it. "Do you know what the difference is between ownership and creation?" she asked. Alistair said nothing. Maya continued. Her voice never rose. "Ownership can purchase a building. Creation makes it possible to exist." The words settled heavily across the table. Alistair attempted one final defense. He argued that public perception had always mattered. He argued that investors responded to presentation. He argued that Serena represented a more marketable image. Maya listened. Then she understood that the moment had finally arrived. The truth he had spent years avoiding stood directly in front of him. She turned the blueprint package toward him and tapped the certification references attached beneath it. "You never wanted ownership, Alistair." Her gaze never moved. "You wanted authorship without creation." Silence followed. Real silence. Not the silence of strategy. The silence of recognition. Maya continued before he could answer. "You spent years convincing yourself that if my name disappeared, my work would disappear with it." She slid the documents closer. "A signature can claim a building. It cannot invent one." There it was. The wound beneath everything. Not greed. Not romance. Not image. Fear. Fear that people would eventually discover he was standing on someone else's foundation. Fear that expertise earned more respect than influence. Fear that the person he tried to erase could leave and remain valuable anyway. Alistair lowered his eyes toward the documents. For the first time, he had no alternative story prepared. No audience remained to impress. No headlines remained to manage. Only truth. Maya stood and closed the portfolio. The meeting was over. "The tower was never your legacy," she said. "It was your opportunity to respect one." Then she turned and walked toward the design floor beyond the conference room. She did not look back. Alistair remained seated beside the red wax seal, surrounded by evidence that could not be negotiated. The foundation remembered. The most beautiful structure a woman can ever design is an exit that leaves her past in ruins and her future in stone. Many people imagine victory as a dramatic moment. They imagine a courtroom decision, a public apology, or the instant an enemy finally loses everything. Real freedom is quieter than that. It rarely arrives on the day the betrayal is exposed. It arrives later, after the noise fades, and the person who was underestimated discovers that their future no longer depends on being recognized by those who once denied their value. That was the lesson Maya Devereux carried forward. Alistair Sterling's collapse had never been the destination. It was only a consequence. The real story began the moment she stopped measuring her worth through a structure someone else controlled. A tower can dominate a skyline. It cannot define a life. Maya understood that now. The months that followed transformed her studio into one of the most respected independent engineering and architectural firms in the region. Developers sought her expertise. Investors sought her judgment. Design leaders sought partnerships built on credibility rather than image. Every project entering Studio Devereux carried the same principle at its foundation: truth before attention, precision before applause. Build it right. One autumn evening, nearly a year after the failed inauguration, guests gathered for the official opening of Studio Devereux's permanent headquarters. The building itself reflected everything Maya believed architecture should represent. Elegant without excess. Innovative without spectacle. Strong because every decision beneath the surface had been made correctly. Floor-to-ceiling glass revealed a series of illuminated tower models displayed throughout the central gallery. Patent awards lined one wall. Structural prototypes occupied another. None of them existed to celebrate status. They existed to celebrate work. Maya moved through the space wearing a tailored red blazer, greeting clients, engineers, developers, and industry leaders who respected her for one reason alone. She had earned it. Nearby, a new generation of architects studied the models she had created. Investors discussed future projects. Design directors exchanged ideas about emerging technologies. Nobody asked who built her success. The answer was visible everywhere. She did. Open the doors. As evening settled across the city, Maya stepped onto an elevated terrace overlooking the studio courtyard. The glass towers displayed below reflected golden light across polished surfaces. For a brief moment she thought about the tower that had once consumed so much of her life. Not with anger, not with regret, simply with distance. Reports continued circulating about stalled negotiations, creditor disputes, and unresolved liabilities surrounding the sterling development. Those problems no longer belonged to her. Neither did the man who created them. Maya rested one hand against the railing and looked toward the future instead. The damaged sketch remained preserved. The patents remained protected. The legacy remained intact. More importantly, it remained hers. The structure Alistair tried to take had never been a building. It had always been the woman who designed it. And she was still standing. This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, reflection, and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.